Hey everyone, and welcome to the 6th round of the Grand Swiss in Riga, Latvia. As I am filming this, it is actually the rest day in Riga. We have a rest day just after the 6th round, and I decided to leave the recording of my analysis until today just because I needed the downtime, and I think 6 rounds were already grueling enough, and now we have to tough it out in another 5. I'm still feeling incredibly hopeful despite the results, but this game I feel like I had real chances. So let's take a look together. So at least this time I'm sitting at a table, so I have no excuses but to use a mouse. Here's my mouse. In the 6th round, I played against a local Latvian player, GOLSTA, and I believe she's the player with the closest rating to mine. I am ranked 50th and she's ranked 49th, so of course I went into the game as I did any other game with a lot of confidence and surety that I was the underdog. I have nothing to lose, and no matter what happens, it's okay. It's a learning experience regardless of the result, and at the end of the day I'm coming out learning something. I'm not going to be all cheesy and say regardless I'm a winner and all these things. Like, it's okay if I'm not, but as long as I'm learning, I'm fine with that. So let's jump into the analysis of the game. I played white pieces again in the 5th round. I also played white, so I was really happy to see that I was playing white against Madara, and I of course expected the Sicilian. So we have a d6 Sicilian. I just played normal knight f3, and here in the other 2 Sicilian games you see in this tournament I played knight to c3. So I continued with knight c3, but as we saw, those games also had e6 and knight c6 in them. So here I just went ahead and played the open Sicilian d4, and I had some tricks up my sleeve, but it turned out so did Madara. Okay, so there's knight to f6, knight to c3, and this is all normal. It's what I usually play. And then I think it took a bit of a turn as to a sort of climb out of my comfort zone, but also I had prepared this line before the game. Of course, it's necessary to prepare, and I was ready for really attacking chess. So I played f3, and it just prepares the setup, very, very common setup in the Sicilian. The name of the variation eludes me completely, so maybe you guys can let me know in the comments what the variation is called. Actually, I will take a second to look it up. Right, and I checked it. It's called the Yugoslav Attack. For those of you who got there before me, well done. So we went for the Yugoslav variation, and after knight to c6, there were 2 things I could have done here. I believe 3, but I hadn't really prepared the 3rd option. I believe bishop c4 is a move as well. I have played it before, but for this particular game, I decided to not play it. Here, the options were g4 and long castle. So these 2 I had prepared, and I suppose at the board I was like, I'm going to decide what to do. I ended up playing g4, but I will show you the variation with long castles. I believe one of the main moves that Madara does focus on, and I don't know whether it is very common to play this move, is d5. Because of course my theory is not where it needs to be, but regardless. So we have d5, e takes d5, knight takes d5, and here I think knight takes c6. But since in this position there's so much that can happen, I think something like bishop takes c3 is an option. I might be completely wrong. Maybe I am wrong. Or maybe it's an option, I don't know. Maybe it's Maybelline. But I believe this has been played, and then bishop to d4 is the move here. And the reason for that is after a move like e5, there's bishop c5 attacking the rook, and now you just win a pawn. And I think it's slightly better for white here. Maybe a little bit more than slightly. So there was this variation, but I could also go for g4. I like the prospects of g4, and after bishop to e6, My preparation actually ended after taking the bishop because I felt like this line wouldn't really happen. But after f takes, I probably should have known a little bit more, but before taking on e6. But I knew knight takes e6 is a move that can be played, and here I was on my own. Of course, in future, I will make sure that this is not the end of my prep. I know it is move 10, so maybe I need to do a little bit more digging next time. So there was long castles and knight to e5. Already I was feeling a little bit under pressure since the moves rook c8, queen c7, or even queen a5 were in the works, along with knight to c4 would have been absolutely finishing for me probably. So I decided to play bishop to e2, just protecting the f3 pawn, and queen c8. I'm not sure if this is theory, but I did not expect as last move I would expect, and I was actually happy to see it for some reason. I was like, I'm not putting any pressure on this e6 pawn. Why are you defending it? I feel like the rook is better on c8 and the queen is better on a5, but I also could be wrong. I missed the idea that Madara did have later on. So I played bishop to e6, h6, knight to c4, and here queen to g5. I completely missed the next move. Knight takes b2. Very, very interesting position, and the last thing I look at is a piece sacrifice, although you do get it back really quickly. I'll show you an example. So if I were to take with the king, I believe knight takes e4 would happen. I was even considering giving my queen here by playing simply bishop takes, but there's not enough compensation in this position, and I would just have to take back, and this would actually lead to something pretty devastating. I think it's mate. There has to be a checkmate somewhere, right? There has to be a checkmate somewhere. I think it's completely over. It has to be. Yeah, so I didn't go for this. Instead, after knight takes b2, I sat for quite a while and I tried to decide what I was going to do in this position. And I just went with bishop takes g7. At the end of the day, I might be losing the knight, but I can get the exchange. My opponent gets the exchange, and maybe I escape a pawn down. Yes, a pawn down. That is what I'm hoping for here. So queen takes c3. There aren't any immediate checkmating threats, although if I do play a move like this, I think it's fine. I'm still a pawn down, but I cannot play this move since this would be simply checkmate, I think. Wait. Shake. Maybe this move would lead to mate. Right, so I have to move the rook, and if I take, it's mate. Something along those lines. It was just checkmate everywhere. It was horrible. Okay. But I found rook takes f8. Probably not a good idea. Rook c8. And queen d2. And I thought, okay, if you just take queen here, I have to play queen c1. Queen takes, and black is a pawn up. Black is a pawn up in this position. It's an endgame, but maybe I can still fight for a draw. So let's go back to the current position. So I played g4 and all of this happened. Then we discussed bishop to h6. Knight took the pawn on b2. And here queen takes c3. Bishop takes f8. Rook to c8. And queen back to d2. And I think Madara was set on getting her checkmate, decided to play queen to a3. I played king b1, only move, knight a4. And of course I can't play queen c1 because I think just check and checkmate. So I really have to be careful here, and I think this is the only move I have. Pawn to c4, check, king a1, and somehow I'm an exchange up now, just for a pawn. I'm very confused in this position, but I think it's way better for me. So here I'm just trying to consolidate, trading queens, but what I fail to realize is my bishop is completely passive, and possibly I would need your help to find a way forward in a position like this. Do I go for h4, but there's nothing there? Is there a4, a5 at some point? I don't feel like there is anything there either. And do I have to sacrifice the rook back for some activity? What needs to happen here? So I just played a series of moves in the hopes that something magical could happen. It did eventually. There were times where my opponent thought a really long time, but a lot of it was just shimmying about without any concrete threats. And I think this was a very, very important moment. So I had two choices here. I could play king b2, or I could just take the pawn and give the exchange back, and I have a passed pawn on b5. And I thought this one gave me a lot more because, first of all, we don't have a lot of time on the clock. We were going into time control, which meant we get an additional 30 minutes. But that too is going to deplete really quickly without really realizing it. So I thought I will go for this second option. For the latter here, I decided to give the exchange back. And I have this passed pawn, and I felt like it was so good to have this passed pawn. So I played king a2. And the reason I played king a2 instead of king to a4, maybe king a4 was better, but I have a reason for this. I didn't want moves like rook takes, bishop here, and something like rook to c3. It was really difficult to find a way to push this pawn, and I thought that after maybe bishop to a2, yes, I get a5. Actually, maybe this is completely winning. And I can just help, but I was always thinking that the knight could retreat somewhere like this, and it could, stop the pawn a lot easier. I thought the, sort of variation that I chose, if rook takes, okay, I played king a2, rook takes, I can just push the pawn, because now if the rook takes the bishop, I push the pawn again, and even if the knight comes back, I get a queen. That, of course, did not happen, and instead my opponent played knight e6. So maybe in this position, I should go ahead and protect the pawn on f3, but I played an immediate b6 and rook to b2, just trying to stop, any counterplay on my passed pawn. As soon as this passed pawn leaves the board, I have no chance. So something like this, I can just play bishop to a6. But another thing I missed was that after my opponent takes on f3, the rook retreats to f8. And that was just so, so sad. But anyway, I decided to push my pawn, and regardless, in this position, I felt like I was a lot better. I was expecting knight to d3, and after my rook moves, then knight to b4. But instead, knight a6 happened. I played king a3, and here I had the perfect opportunity to play king to b5. I think king b5 with the intention of playing king b6, king a7 is, or even king c7 I think is better, is a lot more promising than what happened in the game. And so I ended up taking the knight because I thought it was still winning. And what I had in my mind was that after king to b5, king to d8, and king to b6, there was Zugzwang, but this is not necessary, and also the king here wasn't necessary initially. I just have king c7, and I'm winning. But instead, my opponent found probably the only resource in the position. Here, I think it was more important for me to go after the rook. Well, I don't know in this position what the best move is. I still haven't looked at the evaluation with the engine. I like to record these videos prior to looking at the position with an engine. But I took, and my opponent pushed the pawn. And this is such a critical position. I posted this position on Twitter to see what you guys thought as well. A lot of you got the right answer, but what to do here? There are three things I can do. One is pushing the pawn to d6. 2 is taking the pawn on e6. And 3 is putting the king on b6. Of course, trying to defend the pawn on b7, also put the bishop on b5, just defending the square. So we can go over these alternatives. So d6 is an option, but it would just lead to this. I think I don't really know if I want this to happen, just because after this move I can try to chase the rook, but I think the rook can just take, and it's very difficult for me to defend. Maybe it's still a draw, but it seems difficult. Anyway, oh, the rook can even like move and gain some tempi. So I don't think that was the way. King b6 probably better, because what I had in mind was e3, bishop b5, and then taking the pawn. And here I probably have this move. And then after rook takes pawn, king takes, and king here, there's a chance I could just catch up maybe here with the pawns, and it's not like a huge threat. Or maybe I'm still losing. I feel like I'm still losing. Maybe I'm playing this incorrectly. But that's how I felt. So I thought my most, promising chances here was to actually just take the pawn. And unfortunately, I missed one move. One move. What I thought would happen was this. And then bishop takes and rook takes. And after king here, king takes, and something like, I don't know, bishop here, I simply could put my bishop on f5, wait for the rook to take it, and it's a complete draw, right? But no, I missed rook takes b7. Rook takes b7, and I had to do something. So I brought the king back. I gained the pawn. I even had some really nice ideas at some point. Here, the rook cannot take the bishop because it's stalemate, it's a complete draw. But after some maneuvers, I thought I could get the bishop to either h5. Is this h? It's h5, or f5. And I did. I eventually was able to do this, but the threat was so overwhelming. I think it wasn't really possible for me, and here it's a loss. I missed that there's a check, and the pawn queens before me, and gains the queen. So yes, it was a very hard fought game, and the game lasted about 5 hours, and straight afterwards I was on the live broadcast. It was very nice of them to invite me. They said, despite the result, if you're feeling up to it, please join us in the broadcast, and I was more than happy. I was completely honored that they'd asked me, and a lot of the questions revolved around my experience being here, and I felt like I could provide some relatable answers, and I was just generally happy to be there. And Anna Muzichuk and Stuart Conquest provided such lovely comments and feedback about the interview, and some nice comments towards or directed at me, and I loved everything that they said. But thank you so much, guys, for constantly supporting me, pushing me, and you know what? It is tough. It is taxing on my energy, on my emotions, but there are 5 more games, and I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep pushing, and I just want to thank you for your support. And I'm not gonna cry. You're crying. Thanks, guys. Bye bye.